Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 160 with my friend Gray Mcmurray. This is Gray's second time on the podcast. He and I have a pretty in-depth conversation about nuance, language, how we talk to each other, how we shouldn't talk to each other, and how Gray and I talk to each other. And I've always enjoyed talking with Gray, and I say it up front in the podcast. He's one of the first people in my life, one of the few people in my life to really push me to think about what it is I say. And he does it in this podcast in a great way. That's why I want to talk to him. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I always do when I talk to Gray. So without further ado, this is Gray Mcmurray. Hope you're all doing well, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye. You're one of the most visually striking people I think I've ever seen in my life. So
stop it. Say it again. Come on now.
You're like you're a human peacock in all of the best ways. Well, Gray Mcmurray, this is your second time here, so I'm not gonna bore my listener with your bio. I reached out to you just kind of randomly out of the blue like 2 days ago about doing the podcast again, and there's a lot has happened since you and I have chatted last. We were in your apartment, less than 6 feet from each other, sipping tea, I believe.
Yep.
And now the rest has happened, and I have been sort of having existential crisis after existential. What's the opposite of existential? What's an internal crisis? Or is that what an existential crisis is?
An existential crisis is like a crisis of awareness of the superego, right? You have an observation of yourself from outside of yourself.
Okay.
So it's ultimately the most inside. Maybe an external crisis is actually the opposite. That's a very good question. Hold on.
It's like extrinsic and intrinsic. I think extrinsic is some sort of external motivation outside of your own, like a piece of candy or whatever. Intrinsic is the feeling you get from being generous, being helpful, being kind, like all of the sort of just, it feels good to do a thing for a certain reason, regardless of any extrinsic.
Totally. But so check this out. What the internet has told me.
Please.
Not that I didn't hear what you said, because I agree with you. The difference is, for me, it's like when I hear existential crisis, I think more of what I've used that phrase to mean for myself. Mm-hmm. And it's a deeply selfish, not in a negative term, but it's a completely self-centered experience of not being able to reconcile myself with my life. Mm-hmm. So it has to do with this like awareness of whatever fog I'm in. So it feels like actually a very inner thing.
Yeah.
Like it's like a malady of your inner life. Right. And this says the opposite is a hunger for action, a settlement with the questions that aren't answered and are perhaps unanswerable. So like the idea of that makes sense. I wouldn't have said that. It's like the thing of saying indifference is the opposite of hate or affection or of love, whatever. You know what I mean?
Can I just tell you, I'm going to tell you why I reached out to you in a second, but I just want to say I love you again. Right now, up front, buddy. You just sort of reinforced what I'm about to say. One of the things I have been most aghast at, and I feel like I've been having a reaction to in the world since the last time we spoke, and the reason I reached out to you is because I feel like you're a person of nuance. You're someone who thinks long and hard about words and how they're used, but you also use a lot of words to explain things, and I'm not saying that in a bad way.
No, I take it. Yeah.
A lot of, while I agree with about 100% of the way the world is feeling, like the direction most people are pointed in terms of the anger and the outrage and the frustration around just the way the world is talking about anything. Doesn't matter what we're talking about. But I have been kind of terrified. I've been having these triggering moments of there's bumper stickers everywhere, and there's a real compliance around language and the use of a language or the use of a certain way of speaking on the right and on the left and whatever. And I just kept thinking, who in my life is someone who has challenged me to be like, nope, you got to think deeper about that. And it's like, God damn it, it's Gray Mcmurray. We don't need to go in depth about, we've had a few hotel room conversations surrounding the death of my father and the death of your father, and
for some reason, I remember the chairs in that room so well.
It was dark too. We had the lights off.
Dark. I know. I remember that very well.
And I was saying some things that were patently bumper sticker sort of approaches to grief and whatever. And, whatever. We were being human beings. But you were sort of one of the people in my life who was like, no, nope, 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 nope. Like, I know you're fucked up. I know you're angry. I know you're sad. I know you're depressed. I know you're all of those things, but I'm not going to let you get away with being lazy about how you think about this.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would have been so aggressive as to say lazy.
No, you didn't say those words, but what I'm saying is my impression was like, oh man, like that's what you taught me in that moment, whether you wanted to or not. And I kind of just like, man, I don't have a question necessarily about what to talk about, but I'm very worried about, I'll say this, I'm very worried about the level of difficulty it takes to get nuance in any discussion going on right now in the public, and it scares me, and I don't know why, and I don't know what I should do about it. So I'm just curious to pick your brain about that.
Well, I think part ironically, and I think this is where pendulum swinging, is both pulling back a curtain and closing another one a little bit. But like, I think one thing that's very evident now is the lack of nuance has to do with how much a couple other perspectives of daily life has lacked nuance. And that these sort of like right now sort of zealous language has everything expressly to do with trying to respond to more than an era's worth of no care, no actual nuance. Like, I mean, the idea of having to explain that if you have I remember being in an assembly. It's the first time I've ever heard this idea. There was this guy who was a teacher in my high school and junior high, whose name was Ivan Hageman, and he was half German, half African American, and he was this dude that like everyone knew also studied martial arts. He was like a kind of ripped guy. He was like very severe. He would do this thing as like a joke that eventually everyone in the school knew that if you went up behind him and pretended to hold a gun to his back, he would grab your arm and very quickly have you in a position where he could break your arm. Mm-hmm. And like, just like very fat, and everyone would do like, oh, Hageman's so badass, But he was a really intense, like, so, like he had a great severity. He was a really like lovely sort of like he carried a lot of reverence. He carried a strongness with him. Mm-hmm. And him and his brother ended up starting this school. And I looked it up at one point years ago in East Harlem, which when they started it was like a super crazy bad neighborhood that they were in, the block they were in particular, like really fucking rough place. And just they went through a lot of hoops to try to build this space that was this continuing education. I think it still exists. Mm-hmm. They were either continuing it from their folks, or I can't remember exactly what. But his brother looked exactly like him. Was I believe was a DA, was like a city DA. I feel like he was either he was a civil rights attorney or he was a district attorney, like defense in New York, and he was like. This was not a corporate. This guy came to speak to us, talking about the law and talking about how law affects different people from different communities differently. And it was one of the first times I heard those conversations that I think we all heard at one point in time about, and by we all, I mean everybody. But like I've heard that other people have had the same conversation with somebody's like, you're driving a bus and you have to swerve and you have to kill a woman who's 87 years old.
The sort of ethical quandary.
Ethical dilemmas that
I had that when I was like a freshman in college, or a sophomore in college. I took an ethics class actually, and we talked about that for a whole semester. It was fascinating.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So like this was one of the first times that I had somebody present that, and everybody had their very immediate response, and then he would present a bunch of sort of circumstantial things that would change your response, and then he would make it clear that whatever you thought was obvious wasn't, and that everything can be thought to sort of another degree.
Right.
And anyway, he was going on, and then he said this thing, and this is specifically to the point of talking about nuance and talking about right now. And so we're talking, this has got to be like 1994, I'm going to guess. And he said this thing to an auditorium, mostly white people. And he said, I mean, for example, he was going on, and then he just said, almost as an aside, he said, who here really actually doesn't think that they're racist? Because we're definitely all racist. And I remember him saying it, and not to cast myself in some sort of positive light. It was just this thing of like, it felt very evident to me. I was like, that is absolutely true. There's no doubt, and I get how it's true for me because I understand the moments where I'm scared where it doesn't make sense on the street. Yeah. I understand that I've been sort of conditioned in a certain way. Like what this means is actually such a dramatically big idea that when people have great sort of feel a personal attack or on behalf of themselves or someone else when speaking about something like that, it's like that's actually part of the lack of nuance around that discussion. And this one kid who I will call out, his name was Patrick Holliday. And like that, we weren't buddies. I'm not going to say like, I don't know what that man turned into, but like he put his hand up and he was like, I don't think that's true. I'm not at all. And part of it might've been like in my
How old were you at this time? Remind me.
I'm like 13, 14.
Okay. Let's give Patrick a little pass. Just a
exactly. No, that's what I'm saying.
One.
No. I'm like, so I'm speaking as if I have this feeling about this person who is an adult who's possibly a completely different person. So it's like, this is not a comment. This is like my little 13-year-old head. Yeah. But because of whatever, and he was a year older than me, and because of whatever I thought about him, it felt easy to disagree with his idea. Mm-hmm. And I didn't make we didn't have an interaction in that moment. I just remember that moment and like him saying that. And then this man who is Ivan Hageman's brother, just saying, well, basically just being like, well, you're wrong. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm going to explain to you why you're wrong. And they wanted to say it, but it was just this first time of anyone talking about racism, not as if it was this thing that was in a book that happened 30 years ago then, but rather like pull it back a second, understand that it has to do with how you walk to school. Right. Understand that it has to do with sitting in your house. You know what I mean? It's like, and so that nuance has not existed. It didn't exist then. I just remember that was the first time that conversation opened up to me. And yes, I grew up in New York in a place with a lot of people, and I went through a lot of different communities just to get to school every day.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons. Sorry to interrupt you, Gray, but it's like one of the reasons I like talking to you about these issues because it's why I like talking to Ayn Gordon too because I grew up in a very small town, like a very small rural town in Ohio, and to me it's interesting to hear where on the Venn diagram like your upbringing overlap with mine and like the things like how much we have in common actually is way more, and it's just a lot of talking past one another because of these sort of institutional, I don't know if institutional is the right word, but just these things that have been baked in the cake for millennia, but also just even as far back as the last 20 years,
Absolutely.
The DARE program, I remember sitting in a gymnasium watching the like Reefer Madness video and the sort of caricaturized, grew up on Cops, the TV show, where it was either white trash, which were people like me, quite frankly, and my relatives, or black people being wrestled to the ground by cops, and it was like, and you waited for the punchline at the end of the episode, and every time they got arrested, it's like the credits rolled, and it was like, that was normalizing that sort of approach to viewing people.
A TV show. It was a show.
Right.
It was like that's been a show like my entire life.
I think it just recently went off the air.
Just went off the air. Yeah. No, that's just, it's the what did that just make me think of? I can't remember. It just zoomed out of my head. What the hell just zoomed out of my head? Something about Ayn.
Just the differences in our upbringings, maybe Anyway, just to go back to your point about the lack of nuance in these discussions, it's like I don't know. I just am worried right now, or I guess I'm trying to figure out how much I'm. I think I had a very similar realization. I was 19 years old when a Trinidadian man showed me some scars on his head because cops beat him for playing steel drums in the 1940s and 50s. I as a 18-year-old kid, I was in high school at that point, and then I knew Cliff my whole life until he passed away a year and a half ago. There was that stuff, so it's like I knew of police brutality. I knew that police would do things for no reason. I didn't know. I didn't really understand what that meant, how that grafted on U.S. society and my day-to-day life. But I was like, that's fucked up. And then Cliff took me to a black barber shop. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know black people needed to get their hair cut a different. I didn't. Like what? And then, because Cliff took me and sat me in a chair and just told me to be quiet, I sat there for 2 hours. Cliff got his hair cut for about 15 minutes of those 2 hours, and they just shot the shit for the rest of the time. And I was like, like, okay, all right. This is like another piece of a puzzle, like the puzzle of humanity is like somebody gave me a piece, and I just am thinking like maybe how many pieces have people been given or not been given, and how much am I assuming about people? What is my responsibility to help people fill in those pieces that I was just by random fortune had the luck to be across people who gave me those pieces, like.
Yeah, I mean, I like even in something you just said, when you say, I know that I've learned through things like this that cops will do sometimes things for no reason, and even saying that, like I think they actually absolutely are doing it for a reason, and it might not be something that they're necessarily aware of, but there's absolutely, and like one of the gifts of this moment is like how much this conversation and how much stuff that has been written actually over the past half century there does exist that talks about what some of these sort of institutions are, where they come from, how sort of large scale undercover movements sort of, it's not too far from talking about why the Second Avenue subway was closed for a very long time to keep certain neighborhoods in New York City away from having public transportation so that the communities that live there would stay there and wouldn't be traveling out. And
I mean, the number of steel bands I work with and see in Brooklyn where it takes 25 minutes to walk to the nearest subway,
Exactly. And like that, those things go that way. It's like a cop more readily expressing like physical and like abusive power over a person of color in a socioeconomically sort of challenged neighborhood, this is a ridiculous word, in poorer neighborhoods is not confusing. Like it's not just like, here's what I would do to everybody, but these are the people that nobody cares about, so I can do it to them. It's not. It's actually born of something far more nefarious and something that has to do with money and capitalism. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't pretend to understand or be able to sort of speak in any sort of intelligent way about any of it. But I will say that since protests started happening, I have read and learned about a lot of things that I knew whispers of. You know what I mean?
Like what?
And, that police departments are born of a deeply frightening idea in the United States, that they were like, basically, they were policing capturing runaway slaves. That some of the, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that idea comes from there. Now, what a security force is does not come from there. But what a security force in urban America comes from there. That's wild.
There's things too, like for me, I didn't understand.
Or the amount of money, like the amount of money that police budgets have compared to other, I mean, that is completely.
There's some of the conversations I've been hearing, which to be clear, when I'm complaining about a lack of nuance, I think like just for me personally, like I feel like I'm a good reader of someone's intention. And so I'm not gonna throw somebody out. Like, I'm not gonna be like, oh, fuck you, you're ridiculous because you said abolish the police. And I think that that's a bumper sticker. Like that, just because I feel like that's not the thing I want, I understand what you're saying. So let's talk further, And to be clear, like, there are conversations that are happening now. It's just, I'm just trying to note my own, like, I think I'm not good at the bumper sticker. I understand it. I see its purpose. I don't want to tell people they shouldn't do it. But, like, the thing that I am afraid of is, like, when you don't participate in the bumper sticker conversation and you're willing to wait till the nuance conversation, like, I feel like you're getting, I feel judgment or something, and maybe that's just my own insecurity. I'm willing to admit that too. But I'm glad, though, to say that, or to notice that conversations are happening around, like, why are police called when a raccoon is rabid in the street?
Right.
Why are police called to a mental health issue?
Right.
Like,
All of these things. Yeah.
When someone's having
and like, I understand the danger. I'm in the way that I can without having had anything to do with it. But why do police officers have qualified immunity?
Right. That was another thing I learned about. I didn't know what that was. I mean,
the only reason I knew that is because, like, not unlike the fact that the NRA has lobbied the U.S. government to the point that the U.S. government is not able to perform, what's the word? They can't do studies across periods of time of the effects of guns on private citizens. And the effects of gun violence on communities and the effects of guns in schools. And no policeman in any school has stopped any besides like getting down that sort of path. But they can't study the effect of guns on people because of gun lobbyists. Like, you know, I had an experience a couple days ago. Okay, just this. You
haven't changed your background in a while, so I'm worried you're.
I don't know. Okay, let me get serious because this is like this. This is like this, okay. So, all right. So like the other day, I'm not kidding. I like see in my thread I'm because of an ad showing up while I'm looking at something on bookshop.org, okay? Which everybody fucking number down at the bottom of the screen, bookshop.org, okay? That's good. Use that instead of Amazon. It's good. It's a collection of private bookstores. You know what I mean? It's good. It's good. Anyway, the AT&T calling plans are, and I'm like, basically because I've been on auto pay for about a year and a half of my AT&T plan, and the past few months I've been home a little more often, and been pinching my pennies, and just noticed that within the past few months, my phone bill is like within a $10 radius, like off by $5 each. Like it's changing every month. And I knew that was the case, but when I'm looking at these other plans, I'm like, I don't understand that. I'm a little confused. I just didn't get it. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to call in the past year because something goes awry every time I've gone out of the country to go play some music. So I've had to call when I've done my change to the plan, and then something else gets messed up. And I'm like, I'm not over. You're charging me roaming. I haven't roamed. What do you know? Blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So I have given them an option to let me know this. But so I call and I'm like, hey, I'm looking at your plans. I'm seeing the 3 possible unlimited plans, which each offer unlimited text, talk, and data. 2 of the plans offer plus premium data. So unlimited plus premium data. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that the wording is funny. And then the highest plan of those 3 has twice as much premium data as the middle plan, plus you get HBO Max. And then the starter plan, which is about half as much as the plan I was paying for, which had been like a medium plan a year and a half ago. And I'm like, hey, so I'm just seeing this here. And so what I'm paying is that like, and I'm talking to this person who's totally nice. And they spend a long time sort of talking me through what my plan is without sort of just getting to the actual fact that I have a plan that's grandfathered in that isn't offered anymore. Mm-hmm. That is unlimited talk. I spend $15 to get unlimited text on top of the plan, which is more expensive than any of the 3 options that are there. Okay, so I have a plan and no premium data, just data that is rollover. So I don't even get unlimited data every month.
How long have you been with AT&T?
Okay, I've been a long time, but this last plan was like a year and a half. Okay, so I've been with AT&T a long time. I have no idea. And well, I was with Verizon for a hot second. I just had real bad customer service. And like my time at the Park Slope Co-op, I'm not able to get past it. And so I haven't gone back.
And that's the Park Slope.
I'm not even gonna.
Great, like, you can't open that can of worms.
Okay, I'll get back. I'll get back to it. But here's the end is I was like, so I was paying more than any of the plans offered. No plan. There's no rollover. They're all unlimited talk, text, data. So I was paying for this thing. I was getting fleeced, like completely fleeced. And so I'm like saying like, wait, so if I go to the lowest available plan, your starter unlimited plan, where I'll be paying half of what I was paying, I'll be paying $35 a month. I'm going to have better everything, and I'm not going to have to pay anything on top of it. And the guy's like, yeah. I was like, so it's not, so nobody can let me know this. And they're like, well, like we can't go into your plan. And I was like, so would somebody choose? That's an interesting argument. Okay. And then it said, well, if you would have called, somebody would have let you know. And I said, well, I did call and nobody let me know. Now, so I back
but
up
that's
after.
Also, so like if like let's say gas was a delivered service, like you buy gas at the gas station, right? And you can choose to buy it at the gas station, or they'll bring it to your house. And you're like, sure, I'll pay $2 for you to bring it to my house. But they don't tell you the price. They don't tell you that the gas station just has gone down in $1 over the last month, but you're going to keep paying the same price. And unless you call the gas station to check, they're not going to charge you. They're going to keep charging the higher price.
Of course, no, and exactly. No, it was false, unfortunately, for the dude to tell me that if you call, somebody would have let you know that, because I had called and nobody had let me know that. But most importantly, aside from realizing how hysterical that was and like how neat it was that I was about to sort of pay less, and then I complained enough to somebody who was slightly beyond them, so they were like, we're going to take $10 off a month for the next year, and I was like, that's fine, thank you. It was fine. Those people are not they're not the Wiz. You know what I mean? I know that they are not the Wiz. Like the Wiz is a wholly unhuman thing, but regardless of any of it, that's what. That behavior makes sense for a corporation, for a machine in a capitalist place. Like, I can sort of say that fairly, like justly, like in terms of like treating another person, when a plan is no longer available where someone doing exactly the same thing, it would cost twice as much. I could say that, like, I feel like justly they should be regulated where they can't fleece somebody, but fine, they're not. That's fine. Okay, that's real. But a government treating a group of people that way, you know what I'm saying? Like the difference of that, it's like the fact of that's the expectation where it starts to sort of get broken down with, talking about how the government is organizing where states can spend money, where they can choose to spend money, where certain power is flexed, where it's not, what people are regarded as important, what people aren't regarded as, just like any of just like the way that money is organized and the way that it gets sort of handed out, as if there is not some, like the language gets so tough, but it's like, it's not about culpability or morality. It's just that is there any way to try to organize some sort of mode of thinking that arrives at legislation that is not based on sort of a capitalist economy?
Yeah, I mean,
because it's evident that government should not be run like a capitalist, like a free market business.
I mean, I think I remember when just it got out that cops, I don't remember when it was, but that cops had quotas at the end of the month. I remember my dad was a truck driver. And I remember him saying, like, just be careful at the end of every month. He's like, there's 2 things you need to know at the end of every month. Car salesmen need to get shit off their lot, and cops need to meet their quotas. He's like, so if you're looking to buy a car, do it on the 31st, but don't drive it on the 31st because you're going to get pulled over, And I was like, wow, that's crazy advice. And, I didn't understand, like, and then moving to New York, it really dawned on me. You get a parking ticket, it's $145. In 2006, it was $145, dude. And I'm playing in now. Yes, I've got all the privileges that come with everything in my life, but I was making $7,000 a year playing with soul percussion when I moved to New York and got a $145 ticket. Like that's how they generate revenue. Then I realized to me, when you say culpability, and this is where I feel like the breakdown between the government and humans comes is, I think humans are pretty driven by accountability. Like I surround myself by people who I know will hold themselves accountable, will hold me accountable, we'll do it in a mutually agreed upon way, so that by the end of our life we haven't killed each other and we get better. That's what it means to be alive. But when I interacted with somebody, the second time I was getting a ticket, the guy he was not right. I was right. He was in the wrong. But he was writing me a ticket. And he said, sorry, the machine's already started.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? And he's like, sorry, I've already started writing the ticket. Take it up in the courts. And I was like, he's like, if you're fine, you'll be fine. I was like, what kind of accountability system is it where you, like, this simple, if it's this simple at this level face to face, then it gets increasingly more spread apart the farther people get away from seeing the face it is that they're accusing of something. A judge who just meets somebody for the first time in a courtroom, like, that judge has the least amount of accountability to that person because he or she doesn't need to know what that person's life is like, what they were going through, whether or not that person, was 1 foot over the white line and that's why they got the parking ticket and that 145. It's like all because the machine started
over the line.
Yeah, like all because the machine started. We can't hash this out as a human. Like, no, listen, I'm not saying every federal offense or every misdemeanor offense needs to be like a negotiation on the street between you and a cop. But
Sure.
if the baseline interaction is the machine started, like why are you surprised then when George Floyd happens that people are blowing up like this? Like, that's a big jump I just made, but when you toss in all the little mosquito bites in the system, of course, why is anybody surprised? And unless you've never had any interaction with the cops. And my cousin, like, I have a cousin whose husband is white, wouldn't give up information. Cops beat the shit out of him. Like, it's not always a race thing, but it's a power thing. It's an accountability thing. Those cops have zero accountability because they know this person's not going to rat. Because this person has zero power in the system. Why? Because the machine started. Like...
Yeah.
And we can't even talk about that, and I mean, I don't know. Well, I mean, we can't, like, that. It just feels so hard. Like, where do you enter the conversation with? Can we start with? I mean, I guess the answer is go to City Hall and ask. But like, how do you get people to just stop the machine writing? Like, if we can't do that, then how are we going to get to?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, like, you know what, like. The machine has to be able to re-input it. Of course he can re-input it. It's just an easy place to be able to stop the conversation with the person because they have all the power in the world. I remember the first time that I realized, like, a cop can change your life. Now, again, I have every fucking privilege in the world. I'm deeply lucky. The times that I have been confronted with cops, I have been lucky, but I've been terrified. And I've been in moments in time where I should have been terrified.
You've told me some of those stories.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And like, it's just like, but like, as if you needed more examples, and as if the overwhelming majority of those examples didn't happen to be with people of color who make up a minority of the people in this country and make up a majority of the people who are in the prisons that are not owned by the country, but by businesses in the country. Like, there aren't too many, you don't have to read too many books to make too many leaps.
Right. It's like black people make up 13% of the police interactions, but they make up 26% of the overall, like, violent interactions between cops. Like it's just, it's a disparity. That's like, yes, sure, there are more interactions with black cops than on white people. There's more white people, but when you look at it's like, yes, I see your argument. I know what you're saying. Yeah. But like, you need to, like, I'm just asking you to go the next step further and press the other button on the calculator that gives you the percentage so we can talk about that. Like, that's a different thing. And No, I mean, and like, there was like that recent story about this, like, how there's not accountability between stations. And so people who have, like, get tons of calls at one station and then get moved to another station, none of that new information travels. It's like the Catholic Church.
Exactly. Not only that, or like, I mean, I was thinking about this, and like, this is bullshit. What's about to confirm? None of this is true.
Hey man, we're in a safe space here, buddy.
Exactly. That's what. But I'm saying, like this is not.
Sigourney's on your side. She's got your back, baby.
In fact, Sigourney's on my side, and she has been there for me. So we're gonna go to this place.
All right, I'm going to this place.
Okay. There we go.
That's my dog Anya.
That's what's this dog.
She's from Russia.
That's good. Oh, that's very good. But you think about, it's like. And this is some base full projection, just sort of whatever. But like, you imagine, it's not a surprise that a lot of people that fall into certain categories, do you find out, are in the clergy, are police officers, are school administrators, are, there are certain jobs where you confront people that sort of use the powers that they have, that have not had to go through too many hoops to get that power, where that's an intoxicant for some people to sort of take that job. I'm not saying that there aren't school administrators who are amazing, nor am I saying that there aren't cops who are amazing people, or priests that have done a righteous job across their life. But it's like, the fact is that there isn't the same regulation or culpability among any of those jobs, and that doesn't make that much sense.
I feel like if it's like the same requirement. I don't know. I think if the ramifications in society were as drastic as a plane crash, we would be like, if everybody felt the same tragedy in a moment like George Floyd, the way that everybody on a plane understands how important it is that pilot not be drunk, have slept 8 hours, not had 3 other flights right before it, that all the flight attendants are trained, like that the flight has been scoured for any missing screw. I mean, that there's a reason that heightened regulation exists. Like, why? And if I felt like let's just say this, if I was on a plane and I felt like because 3 black people walked on, the pilot might act differently, I'm getting my ass off that flight. Like, that's not like, why are we okay with it in that part of our society? But when you are interacting with people on every day of your life, I'm sorry.
But that's the thing. But also what you just said, though, think about that.
What?
If you thought that the pilot was going to act differently because 3 black people got on the plane, you would get off the plane.
Oh, I'd take them with me too, just to be clear.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, of course. But I'm saying, like, I wouldn't. That's not. But it's a ridiculous situation. Like, that's my point. Is like,
right. No, but
none of us on that plane would let that plane take off if we had proof that out of every plane flight, 26% of them were going to end up crashing into a mountain.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's like, right now, you know how many plane crashes there are? It's like under 0.0002%.
Oh, totally.
Like,
yeah.
So, like, if you just jumped out to 26%, I think we would look at planes differently. And why we somehow, like, I'm just curious where the disconnect is in our humanity, where we don't see society the same way.
Man, you ever what's that movie? Did you ever see The Third Man?
No.
It's a cool movie. The whole soundtrack is played on a zither.
Whoa.
And it's this woman directed it, whose name I can't remember. And Orson Welles is amazing in it, and he's only in he shows up like halfway through. It's amazing. But there's this scene, Orson Welles is this bad guy, and they're at the top of this Ferris wheel, and they're having this very tense moment, and it's like bad guy, good guy, whatever. And like he's looking out the Ferris wheel, and now I'm using the example as a sort of to make a point that the distance is not the point, it's the perceived distance. But he says this thing at the top of the Ferris wheel. He goes, "From here, how hard would it be to actually pick off any of those people down there?" And it's just this moment of sort of, your perceived, like, from this distance, that death doesn't seem like too much. You could probably pick off 20 of them. You know what I mean? Like, right. From here, it's like whatever. I can't remember how the rest of that moment goes. But, I mean, all of those videos and all of those stories are so horrific. The guy that was like a mental health caretaker who was like shot down in the ground, I can't remember what his name was. Like, that shit is, I mean, all of them are crazy. The ones that are kids, it's insane. There's something, and so it's not to say that any is more egregious than another. There's something wild about watching those 3 dudes just stand around while that guy is on his neck. When, like, it's a really long time. It's just
8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Yeah. It's so, and he's out for 3 of those minutes, and it's just like.
Well, this is the thing. Like, I listen to, I watch a lot of MMA fighting and UFC stuff, and I follow, like, most of my Instagram is like jiu-jitsu artists, they're practitioners and fighters and boxers and stuff, and I just love watching fighting. To a person, every one of them is just like, yeah, of course. Like, you put your knee on someone's neck, that cuts off. Like, he didn't suffocate. Blood was cut off to his brain, and that's how you go unconscious. And then if you just, like, in MMA, that's when you tap out, and a referee is there to say stop. And it happens hundreds of thousands of times a day in jiu-jitsu, like, practitioner gyms all over the world. It happens in competition and on a street when 3 other cops are standing there, and it's happening, and no referee is there to just be like, bro, the guy's unconscious.
Yeah.
Like, well, the idea that George Floyd's life would have been saved by an MMA ref is like, fucking crazy to me. Like,
or just even just like, isn't a ref a better analogy for what a police person is supposed to do in a sense?
Call balls and strikes, and just this fight is over. Like, we are not enemies. Like, that cop is not an enemy of George Floyd. In fact, the history between them is that they knew each other. Like, or maybe they were enemies. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. That's not the point.
They worked. Apparently, they worked at the same place, and whether they knew each other or not but they both did security at a club.
And frankly, in that moment, neither person's background, whether Derek Chauvin is a racist and whether George Floyd was a drug addict, doesn't matter. In that moment, what a ref is supposed to do is say, this situation right now is remedied. At minute 1, where you've got George Floyd on the ground and he's not resisting, you lift up. You move on with your life. You get them like.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that I don't think a cop should be able to do that.
No, I totally agree. Totally agree.
Like, it's just like that. Like the whole, like the wildness of it being so long is another thing. Is just more evidence of something that is, it's like, honestly, it's like, everybody was told about Michael Jackson a really long time, and it was really hard to turn away from two guys talking about what happened to them as kids. Yeah. I definitely do believe them. I understand some people don't, but it's as much as believing them is as much as I've blinded myself to a fact that was evident across, my life. You know what I mean? Like, yes, a lot of people bring up, cases and sue people that have a lot of money to try to get money out of them. That was a lot of parents and a lot of kids that sued that guy. And it's just hard to, regardless of any of that, it's like this is like a terribly obvious thing. Robert Johnson? Mm-mm. Okay, so Robert Johnson was blues singer was a guitar player and singer, wrote songs in 20s and 30s, died supposedly at the hands of a jealous husband who poisoned him. He's sort of heralded as the first of the 27 Club. He wrote songs that were covered by the Rolling Stones and Cream later on. Sort of just an incredibly great songwriter, guitarist, and singer. Sort of iconic, mythic American, sort of legendary guy. And there have been 2 photos of him that have, dude died in 1938 or something like that. There have been 2 photos of him that everybody's known. There was another photo that came out a couple of years ago that some people eventually were like, no, that's not him. And this photo came out in May. And his daughter was like, had it in the attic for like 70 years and was like, I just never. And so there's this 3rd picture of this guy. And it's the only one that, like, he's sort of smiling in a kind of candid image. Like, one other image, he's sort of scary looking. His fingers are like fucking spiders. They're huge, long fingers. And he's sort of standing there and it's like in a photo booth. And he's got a sort of serious face. The other one, he's wearing a pinstripe suit and it seems like a promo shot. And then this 3rd picture exists and he's kind of got a grin. He's got the guitar again. And it's just like this light, all of a sudden, this thing that has never existed has always existed. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, this person gains this, like, a whole, perspective, a whole portion of themselves. And similarly, I think there's something about just like talking about how awful Trump is not the conversation. It's like how awful what happened to George Floyd. He's a wonderful catalyst in this point. You know what I mean? Like, it's a horrific thing. The fact that he's sort of built up as the figurehead of this trigger for this moment, that's beautiful because what happened to him is egregious. But what happened to him is not more egregious than something else. And you know what I mean? And talking about nuance, I think that's one of the things that they've tried to sort of hammer out of this moment. You know what I mean? They've actually, not that there aren't other blunt images and, as you sort of say, slogans and bumper stickers, but it's like, this is terrible. This is not it. Here is the picture. You just opened the book. Look at this. You know what I mean? Like that,
One of the most succinct, and again, like I just want to, again, anybody who maybe listened to this and got mad when I said when I said something about bumper stickers or being flippant, like I do want to be they're not going to listen to this part. They probably turned it off and got pissed. But like, to be clear, like I understand, like I think there's a purpose, like you have to understand what it is you're talking about first, and that starts with like, what is my big picture goal here? Like what is it, you know? And it can be a blunt instrument for good reason to crack open a thing. And one of the bluntest or one of the most succinct memes that I saw come out of it was like, what did you want us to do? Like, we kneeled in protest peacefully, and you called us sons of bitches and told us to get off the field. Like, we literally did the most peaceful thing, and then Derek Chauvin did that very thing. And so like I felt like that, like, I don't, in terms of a like just trying to take out the shock and awe from people, like, you know, people I grew up with who are sort of like, I don't understand why everybody, it's like, bro, like, come on, like, come with us, come with me. Like, I'm not saying you are a bad person. I just, you're clearly not seeing it. You don't live it every day. You don't walk into the pan yards I walk into in Brooklyn when the cops come and search everybody's bag but mine. They walk right by me. Like, I'm not saying that those cops are bad people or that they set out that day to fuck over black people. What I am saying is that you need to just understand what that feels like. You need to understand what it feels like to look at a 12-year-old girl getting her bag searched, and she's done nothing but go to school that day and played pan from 7 p.m. till 2 in the morning. I waltz in, and I've probably got weed in my bag anyway. You know, like, I mean, and again, like, it's just a symptom of the system, and like, a lot of people just never experience it. Like,
yeah, totally. And I think it's both, not only just a symptom of the system, but then also, and like something that feeds back on itself. It's like, not everybody who gets there, who ends up finding themselves sort of playing into what that system has given, is completely corrupted or influenced by the system, but has chosen to be there because the system fits their ethic. You know what I mean? So that's the part where, just like it's not that the church seems like a safe haven for pedophiles. It's that the idea of hiding your sexuality and being beyond sexuality is something that is outmoded for this era, I think. This gets into another sort of thing.
No, I agree with you.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And to ask somebody to live that life right now, not that it ever was okay, but I just know that it's like, it seems ridiculous, and clearly no one is following it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not like it's changing anything. It's actually just creating a safe space for people to be deviant. Right. You know what I mean? And by deviant, I mean specifically doing things against the will of another participant. Otherwise, you know what I mean? And pedophilia, which is, you know, horrible. But like, I'm not talking about any particular behavior between two willing participants. It's just like the fact that it's not allowed for that place creates a setting. Just like the being a police officer creates a setting for people who want to do some shit like that.
It's something I feel like we're all. I said this on a podcast the other day. I got asked to be at the last minute. There's a friend of mine, this guy Sheldon Hoyt, who he's in the pan scene, but he's a DJ, and he hosts this show every week, and it was called Soca Passion Live. And he's like, "Hey man, can you hop on and talk about your experience as a white person in the steel pan world?" And I was like, "Huh? Oh, sure." You know, and so I log on to this thing, and it's like me and 4 other people, and they're all, you know, I'm the only white guy on the panel, and it was intense. I mean, it was like, but in a good way. And there was this one woman, Mecca Rose, came out of the gates pretty hot, and the first words that really sort of where she said them, and I sort of didn't hear the next minute of what she was saying, was she's like, "You need to go get your people." She's like, "I'm tired." Like, she didn't know who I was, and this is where we first met. So it's like literally the worst place to meet and get to know somebody is on, you know, on a DJ live set, you know, on Zoom. And all I could say, and turns out her brother was killed by the cops. He was suicidal. The cops came. He made a motion towards his father. The cops shot him in the back, you know. And it's like, so of course that trauma is like, of course that's what she's coming from, and I totally understand. I just like, come on my podcast, let's just talk. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm not going to tell you that your feelings aren't valid. But I'm also going to say, like, when you say go get your people, I'm going to tell you right now, like, between now and the next time we get in the podcast, I don't know what that means, and I don't know how to do that. But
well, I don't know exactly what she meant, but the thing that I interpret, it's like, I think it's part of the conversation that's sort of come up a lot right now, which is like, you know, I don't have too much issue having to sort of sift through my social media, which is filled with a lot of white people passing along booklets about how to talk to their black friends. I find it a little tedious, and it does feel like, not to be of the moment, but virtue signaling in a way that is sort of not helpful. But I do get the idea of saying, like, this isn't our problem.
No,
like,
yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? Like saying it's like, you actually, like, the conversation is something that white people need to figure out. Like, absolutely. And that's, you know, I think that's why, speaking of one of the blunt things I think in this moment that's also really good is like, is it cool right now to do this? Like, all the unfortunate short answers are definitely true. It is trendy and cool to be a part of these protests. It is sort of easy to sort of like virtue signal in ways that make it feel like you can appear an ally. And I don't think that means that somebody necessarily isn't, but it is a place where it's unbelievably easy to post a fucking black square and call yourself, you know, a part of the Legion of the Good. And like, whatever that is, like, that's all fine. It's the, you know, it feels like it's about actual investigation, and then not letting things slide in the communities you find yourself in, where you realize somebody is taking advantage of the fact that they're only talking to other white people.
Well, and I think this for me though is like where the crux of where like when I confronted Mecca in that podcast, when I say confronted, that's definitely the wrong word, where she and I sort of hit, and the barrier I realized I wasn't going to be able to fix in that conversation was the get your white people. If that was the only, like, for me to say, okay, I'll do that, that was the only way to get through the next 10 words with Mecca. I felt like what I told her is like, I can't do that right now, but what I can say is come on my podcast. I would love to just hear more about you so that I can understand where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. And so you can understand where I'm coming from, because I think I agree with what you're saying. Like,
but she doesn't need to understand where you're coming from. I think that's part of the. But
to me, that's where I disagree. Why? Why do I disagree?
Yeah, but what is it about? Why does it matter where a white point of view is right now when there hasn't?
Because I'm not telling her a white point of view. I'm telling her my point of view, and I understand that's part of my identity. But what I'm saying is, because Gray, I mean, this is to me where I feel like well, here's the other reason why. She absolutely said yes, came on my podcast, and it was amazing.
Cool.
And I know her better now, and she knows me better now, and we had a lovely conversation, and I feel like we got somewhere. And I feel like that argument of like, it's not their responsibility to participate in the conversation is why it's only white people talking to white people. And why that conversation is never going to be fixed is because that is the hard conversation. Sitting in a room with somebody telling them and them saying to you something you know you can't do, because the reality is, Gray, the conversations to convince relatives of mine, friends of mine, not to vote for Trump or to not post All Lives Matter, those don't happen publicly. They can't.
Yeah,
they can't. And so when someone says, go get your people, or hey, white people, you need to like stand up for, it's like, okay, no, I agree. But what I'm tired of is this idea that it's easy, that there's an obvious answer to it, and that if you just, if you see this, then you must say this. It's like, no. I think humans are different, and I think we need to have empathy for each other in order to understand. And in that moment with Mecca,
I have a hard I get what you're saying, and not talking about your conversation with Mecca, but I think it would have to be coming from a different point of view really hard to have empathy for a white person. If, say, I was not a white person and a white person was asking me to have empathy for how hard it might be to have a hard conversation with somebody who's a racist, I don't think I'd care about how hard that is. Well, but I'm not, of course those conversations are hard. You know what I mean? Absolutely. But I don't think it matters at all that they are, and that conversation takes place. Like, of course you hope, and that's hard work, and that's real. I just don't think it actually matters in public at all. One example being like, I remember reading this interview with the son of one of the most famous musicians of the 20th century. And he said this thing, and he's a musician himself and a good musician. And he said this thing about like, it's really, he just basically complaining about his predicament. Nobody will really ever take me seriously or really hear what I do for me because of where I'm coming from. Now, you know what? That has got to be a strange thing to bear, particularly if you choose the life that you've chosen to follow in the footsteps of this wildly famous person. I imagine that is real, and I have empathy for what must be what that is. I think it's actually incumbent on the person who's in that circumstance and the person who's saying that to absolutely never say that in public and never complain about that truth to anyone in public, because you were born with hundreds of millions of dollars. You were born with a circumstance where you actually are in front of and have audience. And whatever sort of small bit of your personal individualism you feel is sort of looked over because of that circumstance, the conversation doesn't weigh. It doesn't mean I don't have sympathy for that person's circumstance. It's just, that's not something for the public sphere, I don't think. I don't want you to try to show me that you're enlisting empathy. And like, that's the point. If like, there has been such a dearth of empathy that in this moment, to try to address what's difficult the other way about trying to make some recompense in an intellectual sphere, in a family sphere, in private spaces. And again, I don't have like a ton of Trump people in my life, but I have a couple that, I mean, very, very few, but like and those aren't public conversations. And not because like, I'm not willing, just because there's nothing that would happen. And it's like, it starts like in the times that I have like sort of in some sort of thing, be like, you can't possibly believe that because that's an anti-human thing to say. I really have to hope that you're not a murderous soul. You know what I mean? Like whatever. It's like, I'm not going to, come at that sort of hard. Those are private conversations because that's a place that you can try to take somebody else's humanity in. You can try to take them in and try to say like, I know this is coming from some place that it feels like there's a poison. And I want to sort of try to understand what the poison is. However, again, I think like not in terms of conversations with people, like I want to know where somebody comes from. And yes, come to a place and have a back to back, it's like, yes, we both will, through sort of being witness to each other, hopefully get to new place and a wider space. Absolutely. But asking for empathy in that moment, it's just like, it feels like not right now. Like, I don't know.
Well, I would encourage you to listen to that podcast because I want to be clear that I never asked for empathy. What I ask and I will say this, I think I'll go to my grave with this, and I think I'm right about this. I think if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, it's two ways. I think if you want to give someone a platform to state their viewpoints and never be challenged or questioned on it, that's a different thing. And that's not what I'm interested in doing. And with Mecca, or with Sheldon, or with Wayne, or with any of my friends that I talk to, I mean, it's why I'm frustrated by this whole conversation, because I see a lot of the data points. I see the like, here's X, Y, and Z why we need to abolish the police or defund ICE or X, Y, and Z, right? And then I have a conversation. It's anecdotal. We'll put it in the anecdotal category, where I literally ask, do you think we should abolish the police? And those people, to a person, say, well, no, that's silly. And then when I bring that up in a conversation with my friends, I'm labeled as the guy with the black friend. And I'm like, well, no, hold up a second. I'm not saying this is the way what all black people think. I'm not painting with a broad brush. I'm saying I've had a conversation with somebody who sees the world differently from the article you read in the New Yorker or something. And I'm a little frustrated by this idea that I'm frustrated. I think I'm very suspect of the amount of white people who are talking to white people about race. I'm very suspect of it. And to be clear, what Mecca told me, or what any of like these conversations that I have, there is empathy gained. There is understanding from the other side of my story, not because I demand it, just because I give it the way I gave it to you, which is like who I am, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like that right now, I feel like that is something people are really bad at. People are horribly inept at I will say this for folks that are on the right, who are incapable of understanding what it's like to be separated from your children at the border. are incapable of understanding what it's like to have a person in the Marines who's going to be deployed to Afghanistan, possibly having somebody put a bounty over their head, and have your president defend the guy in public. Somebody who can't possibly imagine what it's like to have somebody who's gay or transgender in their life. Like,
yeah. Well, but most likely also, I think the thing that's hard for like people who lean wildly left is in terms of hearing something that it's like, I don't think it's a lack of imagination. I think if it's a lack of will, and that, it's not about what that is. I mean, those people undoubtedly have mirrored empathy in their life and people they care about. And the only difference would be to imagine their face on any of those people. It's like that's will. And again, going back to the speaking of nuance again, I think a conversation with anyone arrives at sort of widened empathy, particularly if both participants are willing to sort of be present in the conversation. I was speaking specifically to asking people to understand what's hard about trying to speak to racist people in your life and try to get them to see that there is something guiding their perspective that is not only not helping them and not helping other people, but is anti-human and is born of some things that don't have anything to do with them. It's literally anti-human behavior. And like that, what's difficult about those conversations, I don't think matters. I don't think that part. That's all. It's not about not, and I agree with you. It's not about solely just sort of making a platform for other people to speak, because that's not what a conversation is. Absolutely. It's just that actually the nuance thing works. It's like, it's the pendulum. It's like, it's not, I mean, an example that would be, it's like right as Me Too is sort of happening, the backlash of people were like, what? So I now can't say hello? Or what? So I now can't say you have a nice dress on? What? So I now can't, you know what I mean? Like dudes being like, this is, what are you're blowing up my spot. It's like, yeah, maybe don't say it like an asshole. Like it's already nuanced. Like this is not like you even just doing that. It's horrible. Like that's horrible. You're trying, as if there's something about women saying this behavior is so over the top. You don't understand. We get objectified and possibly feared for our lives from the way that men have treated us for an extremely long time. And it's commonplace. There's a Woody Allen movie, man, the end of fucking Annie Hall, the dude Marshall like talks about like their 16-year-old twins. You know what I mean? We're talking about two 40-year-old guys in that movie. You know what I mean? Like that was just, it was culture. It absolutely was. My mother, a speech that she used to give because she worked for Domestic Violence Coalition, talked about waiting by the door, holding a phone for the cops to come upstairs with her then husband. And the cops saying on the walkie-talkie, like, yeah, we're going to be upstairs. It's only going to take a second. It's only a domestic. And it's like, she's bleeding and swollen. You know what I mean? It's like that conversation. And then when somebody says it's gone too far, they're ruined, now we can't even, you know what I mean? Like whatever that, like, that doesn't make any sense. That's not what it is. That's responding to it as if like that's the bluntness that to me is the problem. It's like, this is not the same. This is actually nowhere near as blunt or the same as what the initial politically correct conversations were in the mid 90s. This is actually more about someone asking for more nuance and then feeling blowback. And that's why similarly, it's like when you have a slogan like abolish the police, you read a second, you understand where that comes from. Yeah, you can sort of be annoyed at somebody saying abolish the police as if it's a sort of anarchist hymn, but it's like, that isn't what that's saying. And it's like what the conversation we had and like some of the points that you made, I think are exactly what that's saying. And those slogans, I agree. I mean, slogans in general, it's like,
well, I think just to zoom out a little bit, like I think where my anxiety comes is like, when you look at it in the picture of the next 4 months of leading up to an election, there's all this stuff that's true, and then there's how that stuff is weaponized and used to convince an electorate that's locked inside, fearful for its life. So just when you graft onto it what is happening right now, like we're not in a bubble, we're not in a vacuum where we can talk about race and gender and all of these things safely and healthfully. Like we're in this moment where nobody alive right now has experienced what we're all experiencing right now together. Like this is a completely new thing. Though tragedy has happened in the past and humans have survived, and we'll figure this out. But I do personally, I think, I want to ask you one more question that's really not related to any of this. But Gray, again, just to say, like, I'm grateful to have these conversations with you.
Me too. Me too.
And I wish there was a social media tool like Facebook that allowed for this as easily as it is to post something, because I think Facebook is an algorithm that humans teach it what to give it. Yeah. And we have taught it to give us slogans and bumper stickers, and Trump has used it. It's propaganda, and it's a tool. It's a tool that's great at it. And I'm personally, when we zoom out and look at everything, I'm very worried at the way humans talk to each other online, as if it is the way you would speak in person. I think 90% of what people post online, they would never say face to face, even if they told you they would. And the reason I can say that is because the number of times I've reached out to someone who said something patently crazy on the left or the right and offered for them to come on my podcast and talk about it, not a person. Probably done it 30 times, Gray. Not a person. It's because they know damn well that, like, you get 10 seconds into a conversation and then nuance creeps in. And there's no there. And that's okay. I'm not going to force anybody or troll them online because they didn't come on. But to me, it's a symptom. It's a symptom that we're dying.
You remember what was it? No, but like no. I mean, I think, it's like a wrong path. It's like, that, that the story of the, well, two things. First, real fast, when Google made that the sort of the AI Twitter account or something like that, and all the people like just turned it into like this like Nazi homophobe. Like it took like moments of trolls to just create this monster.
45 seconds. That's how exponentially fast this meme culture works.
It was that shit was hysterical and amazing. But no, I was going to say like, it feels like, I mean, it's like, think about how quick a period of time what a selfie is became to mean something else. You know what I mean? I can remember the first time I didn't have judgment with what is where I switched in terms of thinking about what a selfie is. I'm not from a generation where taking a picture of yourself was remotely easy, and all of a sudden it is by the time I'm 25 years old. And the sort of immediate sort of industry behind what a selfie sort of is and does for a person, is still not a part of my life. But I remember being in Portugal, playing a gig at a festival in Porto, getting there the morning after, or I guess the night of, and finding out that afternoon about Pulse, the Orlando nightclub, and like seeing New York Times next day, and it was a picture of like the 50 or 60 people that died, and they're all young men, and every one of those pictures, and they're all like between like 18 and 24 or something like that, and every picture was a selfie, and every picture was somebody showing their glorious self. And it was like, it was a lot of people of color, it was a lot of gay men, and it was a lot of young gay men showing themselves in beautiful like pictures that they owned and held themselves. And that was the last picture that the world saw them in that moment, like that thing. It's like, these are the people that died together. Not only are they just kids, but every one of those images was theirs. And it was like it was this intense thing, because I was a world away and I was in a pretty place, and it was like, I'm this lucky like other thing. And I saw all these pictures and I was just like, oh, there's something like, there's more going on with that. That's something else. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a little bit like the speeding up and slowing down gesture in improv. Like there are rules we have, but then I'm joking a little bit, but when you hear someone use a tool that you're abhorred by, and you hear them use it, you're like, oh, okay.
Oh yeah. Exactly.
Now, granted, the selfie is not the speeding up, slowing down. Well, maybe it is. I don't know.
But I mean, like, I have friends now that are much younger than me. And the way that I see them engage with social media and how much of them is in their media, and how much it doesn't feel indulgent or offensive to me. Like there's different fluency with it. Like they're not taking it seriously the same way I am. Right. Like their channel is like it's just a part of their blood. It's like a different thing. And part of that has to do with, how much you engage, how much it's been a part of your life the whole time. But the other thing is like, oh, it's not quite as poisonous. I agree with you. I think there is deep poison in a lot of that social media. But the thing I was going to say before, real quick, there's a podcast about, it's called the Munster Rebellion.
Okay.
You know what the Munster Rebellion was? So it's like we're right before the 30 Years' War, I think. We're in Munster, and the Anabaptists, so the extreme Baptists after the Reformation, basically end up in Munster, and a wild thing happened. And it is something that went awry, right? Like Martin Luther, cool idea, good problems, nice corrals, you know what I mean? Like everything's fucking, it's peachy, and it like leads to sort of plenty of other stuff, and that goes a down thing. But there's the Anabaptists go down this rabbit hole, and the Munster Rebellion is a wild story. That is a crazy story. The Tale of the Two Jans is another way it's talked about. There's a podcast, Hardcore History.
Oh yeah, Dan Carlin.
Okay, there's a 4-hour episode that's a single episode about it.
All right.
I can't remember what it is. Prophets of Doom.
Oh yeah, okay. I haven't listened to that one, but I've seen it.
Unreal. Anyway, but
he's a national treasure, by the way. Anybody who doesn't know Dan Carlin, and man,
fully true. But just to say that same thing, I agree with you. I think the way that it's going right now, it leads to sort of it poisons intention, poisons speech. Everything is sort of it's not helping itself. But I think in the way that it's hurting itself is only making room. Like, it's not that I believe progress moves to a better thing. I think it actually just moves. So I don't know what is coming, but I think it's evident that it can't stay, or it'll splinter and it'll just be sort of states on the coast and then states in the middle.
I don't know. I think social media, I feel like, before we get to our last question here, I feel like social media is a state in and of itself. It's like the 51st state or the 53rd territory that we all agree. Like there's Puerto Rico, St. Croix, St. John, St. Thomas, and then Facebook and Twitter. And I feel like I don't think there's one or the other is going to win out. I think there's going to be a crack, and like the system is going to shake and stuff will settle down. Like there's a lot of assumptions going on right now on social media. There's a lot of assumptions around language. There's a lot of assumptions around what people know about you because you've posted something on social media. It's like, I posted this, so therefore if you don't know this about me, it's like, whoa, hold up a second. There's like billions of hours of content online, and you can't assume that everybody's like poured over every ounce of what you've put out there. And I think it's leading, I just see the way it's leading, the way conversations are happening. I have a fear that it's going to break. And I don't, like you're saying, I don't know when. I think it'll be for good, but I don't think it'll be for the type of good that a lot of people that I know really well think it's headed. And I don't mean that with any judgment or hate, because I mean, these are all these are former Soci students, people I love and care about, people who were in your Manny Petty lecture, Gray, like, and I see the way now they're outside of this test tube that I had them in, communicating in ways that if they were in Soci, I would question, and so but I can't, because that's not my place, and I don't know, so I'm just worried. But my question, to wrap this up, Gray, and we have exactly four. Please. Oh, you're running into your lady. You disappeared.
No, I got it. I don't want to admit that I just killed an ant, and I feel bad about it.
Dude. There's like billions of them to every one of us. You're fine.
Anyway, continue.
The sanctity of life. You clearly, I love every time you come back, Gray. You just emerge out of that.
Oh, I know.
Chest.
Oh, no.
Okay, so Gray, in your last 13 minutes here, before I gotta let you go,
all right.
I mentioned Manny Petty a second ago. You gave an amazing sort of talk at Soci that was way longer than I think you're going to be able to summarize here, but I feel like it would be a good thing if anybody found this little nugget of you talking right now. I feel like it might help people get some bearing or get their footing under them in a time. I think one of the assumptions that I'm worried about is that everybody is dealing with this pandemic and dealing with being locked inside and dealing with the anxiety of having to now make art online. If that's having to make music or communicate online like we're doing, that can cause a lot of anxiety in people. If that was the only thing we were talking about, forget about race or any of these other things. That's enough to cause me to crumble. And I feel like I got my shit pretty much together, And so I'm curious if you can give the like Cliff Notes version of the mani-pedi sort of like pep talk. If you even, I don't know if that's even an appropriate thing to ask of you in 13 minutes,
I mean,
but what do you say to folks right now who are concerned or curious or lost?
About making things?
Yeah, I mean, just like, okay, so there's all the crises, the sort of existential crises that we talked about as a society that I think we need to deal with. But like, you know, prior to this, a lot of us made music and we thought about that stuff in a way that felt healthy. And I have found myself having a hard time re-engaging with that part. And I'm just curious how you have done it and what advice you might have to somebody who's like, I was 19, I was a sophomore in college, and now I'm on Zoom all day. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, okay.
I love you, buddy.
I love you too. First of all, so as is evidenced by the conversation we just had, like our heads are in a lot of different places right now. Conversations that are happening, like it would feel odd to talk about anything else. And I think that's part of the place I'm eventually getting to. And in April, you know, I had a number of friends that like made records, fucking did it. Like lockdown happens, they were going to be on tour. It's like making another record, doing the thing, like bang Zoom. No. And, you know, given what this is and given what people say about pandemics, not just talking about that now, you know, it seems like this might be something that will become more common in the world. Now, one thing I didn't understand when people talked about pandemics, what this is that one of the things that allows a pandemic to sort of last a really long time or get big is that it's not as deadly as shit like Ebola. Like I can remember when this started, like thinking like, well, we're lucky it's not like a deadly one. And then understanding something that makes sense. It's like, well, it kind of can't because those things force a quarantine that leads to death. So the disease can't.
It burns itself out quick.
It burns itself out. Yeah, exactly. And so like, you know, putting that sort of or later understood as a rational fear away and sort of getting a sense of this thing and being like, well, this happening, you know, this will change, that changes the world. Like the world will be different with regards to it. Now, it doesn't mean we'll handle it better or worse. It's just the idea of it being a possibility will be true for the rest of our lives. So the way that April felt, you know, the idea that the food supply chain, that the supply chain just period could go off. Like people, you know, get all of that, what that moment felt like.
Toilet paper, bacon.
Toilet paper, exactly. All of that shit. The way that that moment felt, you know, probably won't ever really feel quite like that ever again. Even, you know, should something else happen that could even become more egregious, it just won't feel like that again. And, you know, I think about some of the stuff now and like, and now realizing that I when I thought I wasn't making anything, I was making these sort of snippets of stuff. But when I look back at it now, it's like I didn't have that, I didn't have access really to thinking of that as being a part of what was going on. And part of it was thinking, oh, that's what everybody's, you know, it's like, oh, now it's like as if it wasn't true before that I'm a part of the population of the living on the earth. It's like, oh, now I'm a part of the population of the living on the earth. Like, no. It's like, oh, okay. And it took me, April, and it took me getting some better patterns in my life, like, you know, exercising in a way, doing less sort of bad things, spending actually a ton less money because I was making no money. And like, I got some actually other stuff did change for me that ended up being sort of pretty positive, but not about like creative energy. I had some mechanical energy. I had some things that I would play every day because it felt like a nice way to spend time and sort of a better version of getting out of my head. But the thing that I've come back to, first of all, nothing beats a deadline. So whatever it is, if it has to do with sort of making something for a screen or sending something to a friend or wanting to make something that's a part of some online sort of thing or any of that stuff, the idea of having a deadline helps you access having to do something. And at the end of it, it always feels better. You know what I mean? That has always been a thing that felt better. But more importantly, it's it reconciling that it sort of is not important. And the only reason I say sort of is because it also is. So it's like, it's definitely not important.
What's not?
And what you want to make.
Oh, okay.
And like the argument that it can come really quick is like, if someone has audience and they have access to audience, that gives them more reason to sort of tickle their indulgence more. And somebody thinking that that's the reason that they want to access audience is to be able to indulge themselves. And that if that's the route that you get to your creativity, it'll probably not work out. You probably won't, because if it's serving getting audience, and nothing wrong with that, I'm not knocking that. It's just that if you're having a conundrum about making, I think you have to be honest with yourself about whatever it is that you're doing when you're making. Because to make it evident that you are here is something that you want to witness when you make something. If something like happens and it comes back to you, and then you're there. When I was a kid, I can remember, I mean like early high school, I can remember saying that I really liked Rothko, and that I really liked these blocks of color. It was like, Rothko's my shit. Like that's like, yeah. What do you like? I just really like Rothko.
I'm a Rothko
and
guy.
Yeah, I'm a Rothko guy.
I'm more of a color field guy.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, this is my vibe. Yeah, exactly. Here's my vibe. But like, and if I'm honest about what that was, is like my initial reaction was, it's like there is something very austere, and it feels sort of impenetrable, and it felt both simple and deeply complicated. And I like to align myself with something that felt like it added depth to whatever somebody else might perceive about me. Mm-hmm. And so I was using it. I was using my affection for it as a means to sort of apply something to myself. Later, I'm in college and I'm learning to play over chord structures that are a little denser, and chords are changing a little quicker. And in order to sort of like really learn to flow, because I didn't really practice enough to get my lines together so that I could really flow hard through some like complicated songs, you pick your signposts. And I would play, and I would then, learn to do it, be really good. And then I'd pick my places to be really outside the chords, and then be able to come back so I could give the illusion to whatever audience member that I had some complicated gesture or idea about how to sort of approach something that would give them a perspective that I had a sort of complicated, organized method. And one thing that I found out about both of those things, both of those are, the thoughts of a sort of like frantic, anxious teenager. But looking back now, the anxiety about the Rothko thing was the fact that I had some illusion that liking it but not understanding it was something. I actually did just like it. Like I did like them. And I wasn't willing to sort of admit that it was born of a sort of an initial impulse that didn't have too much context. I liked it. I liked looking at it. I could sit with it for a long time. I have no problem saying that now.
Yeah.
When I sit and want to make something now, when I want to sort of like dive in, the way that it affects the rest of my life, the reason I guess the reason I'm going down this path, as opposed to being able to say what the mani-pedi thing is, what that conversation was, is like admitting whatever falsehood you're presenting in a room, I think is deeply important to be able to sort of not change what you're going to do, but reassess the way that you're doing it so that at least you can be present while you do it, as opposed to worry that you have to sort of qualify something. Yeah. And so right now, I understand the thing that feels different is you do have to qualify both to yourself and to everybody else something that you're going to put out into the world. And not for the reasons that you think you do, that why I'm deserving of attention or like whatever that sort of stuff is. For me, I just need to know it's deliberate.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that's like, and like the way that you push has to be with care. Well, you know what I mean? The way that you ask for attention has to be with care, and you have to admit that you're asking for attention.
Well, and especially now, like I think intentions. One of the things too, I just to sort of, I think this relates to our conversation prior, but intention is something I feel like as human beings, like you need to really dig hard to know what it is in yourself, but in others too. And you've always been somebody whose intentions, I feel like you always make it clear what your intentions are, and especially now, like I think when the world is upside down. I mean, if your intention was like I need to make art because the concert hall wants me to sell at least 75% of the seats, otherwise I don't get XY cut of the door. It's like, well, if that's the reason you're making, Carnegie Hall is going to be seating people 6 feet from each other, so you shouldn't be basing your art off of what concert halls are going to be able to hold. You know, like,
Right.
you should not that you shouldn't base your thing off of what, you know, of course you want people to love it, but right now the crucible's pretty hot, and it's the stuff that has intention and clarity and is thought through and is genuine and deliberate that is going to rise to the top. And that's unfortunate, because I think a lot of people are going to realize their stuff wasn't so thought through. But that's right now, everything's being sort of distilled down to this one medium, and it's fascinating to watch how people deal with it, I think.
Yeah. And like, and I think it's also safe, and not just sort of, it's not just demurring to also say, like, I don't know when it ends. It's like, you know, when you watch people on social media, and, you know, and the social media train that I see is like an echo chamber for most of my shit. Like, I don't have too much dissent. People aren't posting too many things I disagree with. They might go about it in a way that I find tedious, but like, for the most part, I'm seeing all the same shit. And the one thing that is sort of still, it's teetering now. It's just like, you know, people getting back to their songs and their cats and their vistas. You know what I mean? And like, whatever sort of small trickle of how people get back to that, okay, I hope what was rampant for about a month and a half doesn't go away. I hope that stays as being a part of people's way of using that space. Similarly, just like when people were calling out when people are calling out all these institutions of being like, thank you for posting your black square. Can you post a picture of your board? You know what I mean? Can you post a picture of who you've commissioned in the past 25 years? Like, it's possible to keep working and planning and organizing yourself and the art that you make and the people that you surround yourself to make it with. And it's also okay to be doing that and also maybe making some space right now. You know what I mean? I don't think it takes away. And like, when people, I mean, like, you know, I play music with, you know, I happen to play music with a lot of people of color. And it's like that, you know, and I get hired to be in places. And so my conundrum is not directly tied to my bank account in terms of how I live. But in terms of what I make and how I sort of see that, it's like, I think it's okay to sort of feel urgent and to be making because you have to, and to like have a plan about how you want to sort of give and present things to the world and whatever you have sort of coming that you have to present to the world. But it's also okay to, in the moment, be like, and maybe that's not going to be right now. Maybe what my plan was for the next 4 months is not just blown up because of the pandemic, but also because of something else. Maybe that's not right now.
Well, one of the things that, just to wrap it up, Greg, one of the things you said to me in that hotel room, and I'm probably paraphrasing, but I feel like moments in my life that have been burned into my psyche that I can't take out. That was one of those, and I mean this in a good way. That conversation, you said something to me like, your feelings aren't proof of anything. Like, you're saying, you just said what you said because of your trauma, not because of truth. And I was like, fuck you. Like, you're right. God damn it. And what I hope people, artists, anybody coming out of this who is at all worried about how you're going to do it, like, I hope you are aware of the things that you've gotten better at. Like, there's things in my life that I've had to sharpen tools in my shed I didn't even know I was going to need, and that's great. It actually feels useful. For me, it's like Final Cut. Like, I've gotten better at Final Cut. You know, it's like I never wanted to, but it actually, like, it's useful to me because I'm using it in things that aren't music related. You know, I'm helping my wife out with her church services, like all these things. But also be aware of where you're traumatized, because sometimes the way you make art or the way you see the world, the way you react to something is because of trauma from this moment we're all in. So, like, I just want us, like, when we talk about empathy or we talk about any of these things, like, let's try to understand that, listen, I'm a racist. I'm also absolutely traumatized by shit in my life, and I react to them in ways that aren't rational.
Absolutely.
And I am just grateful, Gray, to have you in my life, because you're someone who early on, prior to me having a therapist, you were the first person to tell me your feelings aren't proof of anything. So I appreciate that about you, bro. And I hope we can have more conversations like this. And please stay safe and healthy.
You do the same.
All right. Love you, buddy. We'll talk to you later.
Yes, indeed. Take it easy.
See you, buddy. Bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast was brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com, liquidrum.com. check them out down in Waco, Texas. Todd Meehan, liquiddrum.com. Also, all the steel drums I teach on and perform on were built by Kyle Dunleavy. DunleavyPans.com, DUNLEAVY Pans.com. And finally, check out the organization paninmotion.com, run by Kendall Williams and Jerry Guy and Trisha Guy and Arisha John. They're an amazing organization promoting Pan in Brooklyn. All right, hope you're all doing well. Talk to you soon.